This happened 6 months ago, and I'm still trying to understand how one public moment can detonate an entire life. It was a Thursday evening in March when my husband Samuel decided to humiliate me at a family dinner, right in front of the very people who built the world he'd been living in. He thought he was making a statement. He thought he was taking back his freedom. What he didn't know was that he was stepping on a legal landmine so old and so precisely engineered that it didn't explode with noise. It exploded with signatures. My name is Michaela Davidson. I'm 34, and I'm the heir to the Davidson family fortune. Not the flashy kind that pops up overnight. This is old infrastructure money. Trusts, properties across 3 states, private healthcare networks, country club memberships that you can't buy with cash, only with pedigree. Social doors that only open after generations of people quietly holding them for you. If you've never lived inside that kind of system, you don't notice it. It's like plumbing, until the day the water stops. Samuel married into the Davidson name 5 years ago. At first, he loved everything. The effortless access, the events where people smiled too quickly, the way his yes carried more weight, just because of the last name attached to it. Then, about 18 months ago, something shifted. He started acting like the name was a cage. He stopped wearing his ring. He introduced himself with his old surname at events, like he was trying to practice being someone else in public. And then there were the phone calls, always taken in other rooms, always with that tight, energized look people get when they're hiding something and calling it growth. By the time we sat down for our monthly family dinner in November, 24 relatives around that mahogany table, Samuel had brought his friend, Jade Mitchell. Halfway through the main course, he stood up, lifted his wine glass like he was on stage. And with a smile bright enough to blind the room, he said, "I don't want the Davidson name anymore." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I reached into my pocket, took out an envelope I'd been carrying for months, set it on the table in front of him, and slid a pen across like a judge closing a case. "Fine," I said, "sign here." And he did, right there, in front of witnesses, without reading a word. Before everything collapsed, before signatures and silence and irreversible consequences, there was a version of my life that felt stable. I'm Michaela Davidson, 34 years old, raised inside a system that was designed long before I was born. The Davidson family isn't new money. My great-grandfather, Edmund Davidson, built the foundation after returning from Europe with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a very precise understanding of how quickly permanence can evaporate. He had watched old bloodlines dissolve overnight, families reduced to names without substance. So when he built Davidson Industries, he didn't just build companies, he built safeguards. My childhood was structured, disciplined, and deeply unromantic in ways people never expect. Wealth wasn't discussed as luxury, it was discussed as responsibility. You didn't spend the family name, you carried it. Trusts, properties, medical access, social capital, those weren't perks. They were infrastructure. You didn't own them. You maintained them. When I met Samuel, I wasn't looking for rebellion. I was looking for quiet. He was charming in a soft, approachable way, not loud, not flashy. He worked in community outreach for a nonprofit, talked about impact instead of profit, and had this way of making simplicity feel intentional instead of limited. Compared to the people I'd grown up around, he felt grounding. We met at a charity planning meeting, one of those awkward networking mixers where everyone pretends they're not there for connections. He spilled coffee on my notes, apologized like it was a personal moral failing, made me laugh when I hadn't expected to. We dated slowly. He didn't rush into my world, and I appreciated that. When I finally introduced him to my family, he was nervous in a way that felt genuine. He asked questions. He listened. He wore the suit but never tried to outshine the room. When he proposed, he did it privately. No spectacle, no audience, just a simple ring, purchased thoughtfully, and a question that sounded like a promise instead of a performance. The first year of marriage felt like a honeymoon that didn't end. Samuel loved the access, the travel, the invitations, the way doors opened without explanation, but he framed it as curiosity, not entitlement. I believed him. My family welcomed him cautiously but kindly. They didn't fawn. They observed. They always observed. At family dinners, Samuel was attentive, asked my aunts about their charities, complimented my grandmother's china, learned names quickly. He fit well enough that I stopped worrying. That was my first mistake. Around year 3, the tone shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, just comments. How long do you think your family expects us to play these roles? Do you ever wonder who you'd be without all this? I don't want to be known as someone who married a last name. He'd forget to wear his wedding ring. Not always, just often enough that I noticed. He started introducing himself using his birth surname at events, like he was rehearsing a future I wasn't invited into. When I asked him about it, he smiled and said he was just finding balance. Then came the language changes. Words like toxic legacy, inherited power, breaking cycles. He framed it as personal growth. I framed it as a phase. People question things in their 30s, I told myself. That's normal. What I didn't tell myself, what I actively ignored, were the phone calls he took in other rooms, the way he checked his screen during dinner, the sudden obsession with authenticity, with detaching from systems that didn't serve him, and the way he started subtly positioning himself against my family instead of beside me. I loved him. I trusted him. And because of that, I didn't see the fracture forming beneath my feet. By the time I did, it was already too late. The shift didn't come with explosions or shouting. It came quietly, the way rot always does, hidden beneath surfaces that still look solid. Samuel started changing the way he spoke about my family when I wasn't around. I could feel it in the pauses when conversations ended abruptly as I entered a room, in the way his tone softened artificially when my parents were present, like someone trying too hard to sound reasonable. At home, the comments became sharper. They don't really see me as an equal, do they? You realize none of this is actually yours, right? It's all tied to rules written by dead men. Doesn't it bother you that your entire life was pre-approved before you were even born? He said these things casually, as if they were observations instead of accusations. And I found myself defending my family in a voice that sounded apologetic, something I'd never done before. He began skipping family obligations. First charity luncheons, then smaller dinners. When he did attend, he looked bored, restless, like someone waiting for a better offer to arrive. My aunts noticed, my cousins noticed. Even my grandmother, who missed very little, asked me quietly one afternoon, "Is Samuel unhappy?" I said no too quickly. The phone calls became more frequent, always silenced, always taken in the hallway or outside. When I asked who it was, he'd say, "Just someone from a growth group," or "a friend who gets what I'm going through." That was when Jade Mitchell entered our lives. At first, she was just a name. A tech consultant Samuel said he'd met through a personal development seminar, someone who had broken free from traditional expectations, someone who believed in choosing yourself over systems. The language he used when talking about her was rehearsed. She challenges me. She makes me think. She understands how suffocating this all can be. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse. I asked careful questions, the way you do when you don't want to seem insecure but can feel something tightening in your chest. He assured me there was nothing inappropriate, smiled, touched my hand, told me I was imagining things. And because I loved him, and because I didn't want to become the controlling wife people already assumed I might be, I believed him. But the emotional distance was undeniable. Samuel became critical in small, precise ways. He questioned how I spoke at events, how I handled family expectations, how I didn't push back more. "You don't even realize how much power you have," he said once, frustration sharp in his voice. "You just accept all of it." I asked him what he wanted from me. He didn't answer. Instead, he began posting online, vague quotes about authenticity, about rejecting inherited privilege, about choosing meaning over comfort. I recognized the tone immediately. It wasn't Samuel's voice. It was Jade's. And still, I tried to rationalize. I told myself that marriages evolve, that discomfort was part of growth, that if I just listened harder, compromised more, he'd come back to me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that while I was trying to preserve our marriage, Samuel was already rehearsing its ending. And he wasn't planning to leave quietly. He wanted an audience. By the time our November family dinner approached, the air around him felt charged. He moved with manic confidence, smiled too much, slept too little, carried himself like someone who believed he was about to deliver a monologue that would change everything. I sensed it. That heavy, electric feeling people get right before something irreversible happens. I just didn't know yet that I'd already prepared for it. The first Saturday of November arrived cold and clear, the kind of evening that makes everything feel sharper than usual. Our monthly family dinner was a ritual older than I was. 24 of us gathered around that long mahogany table, polished so often it reflected the chandelier light like still water. The china had belonged to my great-grandmother. The silverware weighed heavy in the hand, balance the way things are when they're meant to last. Samuel had been restless all week, phone glued to his palm, energy jittery, unfocused. He kissed me distractedly that evening, already half somewhere else. When we arrived, I noticed immediately that he wasn't alone. "Who's that?" my cousin whispered as we entered the dining room. Samuel didn't wait for introductions. He gestured casually toward Jade Mitchell, standing near the sideboard like she belonged there. "A friend," he said, too easily. Jade wore a black dress that was technically appropriate but slightly off, like a costume version of formality. Perfect hair, perfect smile, the kind that scans a room for leverage instead of warmth. I felt something settle in my stomach, heavy, certain. Dinner began as it always did. Polite conversation, updates on foundations, and expansions. Someone mentioned an upcoming gala. Someone else complained about travel delays. The rhythm was familiar enough that part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined the tension. Halfway through the main course, Samuel set his fork down. The sound was small, but deliberate. He stood, and just like that, the room tilted. When Samuel stood at a dinner like this, people paid attention. He had learned that power comes from timing, not volume. He lifted his wineglass with a practiced ease, smiling like someone about to receive applause. "I have an announcement," he said. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even my Aunt Margaret, who never paused for anyone, went quiet. Samuel's voice carried cleanly across the room. "I don't want the Davidson name anymore." The silence that followed was dense, pressurized. I could hear the hum of the chandelier, the faint scrape of someone's chair as they shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, no one spoke. People looked at me, then at Samuel, then back at me. He wasn't finished. "My partner," he continued, gesturing toward Jade, helped me realize something. Jade stepped closer, eyes bright. "These people," Samuel said, sweeping his gaze around the table, "are trapped in a legacy of entitlement. I deserve a real man's identity, not one tied to outdated privilege." A few gasps rippled through the room. Someone laughed nervously. My grandmother's hand tightened around her napkin. Jade smiled like she was watching a performance she'd rehearsed. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Because humiliation, when it's that public, strips everything down to its bones. It tells you exactly where you stand. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The envelope had been there for months. Cream paper, heavy stock, a pen clipped neatly inside. I placed it gently on the table in front of Samuel. "Fine," I said. My voice didn't shake, my hands were steady. "Sign here." The confusion on his face was immediate. He glanced at Jade. She frowned slightly, like a director realizing the scene had gone off script. "What is this?" Samuel asked. "Exactly what you asked for," I replied. "Freedom from the Davidson name." He hesitated for half a second. Then the grin returned, wider, louder. "Perfect," he said, picking up the pen. "Finally." He didn't read, didn't ask questions, didn't look at me. He signed with a flourish meant for an audience. The moment the pen lifted from the page, something quiet and irreversible clicked into place. Across systems Samuel had never known existed. Across clauses written by men who understood permanence better than romance. I stood, pushed my chair in, and walked away from the table without another word. Behind me, the whispers erupted. But I didn't turn back. Shock doesn't always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives as stillness. That night, after I left the dining room, I didn't go far. I walked into the side hall where portraits of Davidson men and women lined the walls, faces that had survived wars, depressions, scandals, and quieter tragedies no one ever wrote about. I stood there, breathing slowly, letting the weight of what had just happened settle into something manageable. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because some part of me had already been grieving for months. Behind me, the dinner continued in fragments. Low voices, disbelief. My name spoken softly, like something fragile. Samuel didn't follow me. That told me everything. When we got home later that night, he was euphoric, practically vibrating with victory. Jade wasn't there, but her presence lingered in the way he moved. Confident, unburdened, already halfway into another life. "Well," he said, tossing his jacket aside, "that went better than I expected." I watched him like you watch someone who no longer belongs to you. "You humiliated me," I said quietly. He laughed, not cruelly, dismissively. "No, I liberated myself." I nodded, because arguing would have been pointless. He went to bed without another word. I stayed in the living room, staring at a house that was already beginning to feel like a museum to a marriage that no longer existed. By morning, the systems had done what they were designed to do. At 6:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from our family accountant. Access revoked as per charter protocol. At 6:12, another notification. Group health policy updated. At 6:19, a quiet confirmation that trust distributions had been rerouted. By 7 a.m., Samuel's world had begun to evaporate. I didn't tell him, I didn't warn him. The clauses were automated for a reason. The first sign came when his credit card declined at a cafe. I heard the phone call from the kitchen. "What do you mean it's not authorized?" he snapped. "I've used this card for years." Silence. "Well, fix it." More silence. He hung up, confused, irritation flashing across his face. "Probably a glitch," he muttered. By noon, his online banking access was locked. By mid-afternoon, the family wellness account that covered his gym, trainer, and medical appointments was inactive. That was when panic began creeping into his voice. He called the family office, then the accountant, then finally Harold Whitman, our attorney. I didn't hear that conversation, but Harold told me later. Samuel had called 6 times that day, each call louder, more frantic. "I didn't know," he kept saying. "I thought it was symbolic." Harold, patient as ever, explained it slowly. Public declaration, multiple witnesses, signed documentation, no coercion, a perfect activation. Samuel came home pale. "You knew," he said, voice unsteady. "You planned this." "I prepared," I corrected gently. He accused me of cruelty, of setting a trap, of punishing him for honesty. I listened, let him empty himself of blame. Then I asked one question. "Did you mean what you said?" He hesitated, and in that pause I found my answer. That night I lay awake, not replaying the dinner, but replaying every moment I'd ignored before it. The comments, the distance, the way he'd already left long before he stood up to announce it. I asked myself all the questions people ask when something breaks. Was I too rigid, too trusting, too blind? But beneath all of it was one undeniable truth. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a choice. And choices, especially public ones, carry weight. By morning, the shock had hardened into resolve. And whatever came next, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done apologizing for taking him seriously. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, quiet, precise, and relentless. The first week after the dinner, Samuel treated the situation like a misunderstanding that could be negotiated away. He called it temporary turbulence. He assumed someone would intervene, that I would. When I didn't, he shifted strategies. My phone began filling with messages from his mother, carefully worded at first. "He's confused. This isn't like him. Marriage is about forgiveness." Then less careful. "You didn't have to destroy him to make a point." I read them all. I answered none. Samuel's friends reached out next. People who'd once enjoyed our hospitality, our events, our generosity. "He's under a lot of pressure. Jade is influencing him. Can't you at least talk to him?" They spoke as if I were the one holding the detonator, not the one he'd handed it to. At home, the arguments deepened. Samuel accused me of weaponizing my family, of using contracts instead of compassion, of choosing legacy over love. "You're cold," he said one night, pacing the living room. "This is exactly why I needed to get out." I watched him move through the house, touching things that no longer felt like his. "You wanted freedom," I said. "This is what it looks like." The calls from Jade intensified too, not to me, but to him. I heard her voice through walls, sharp, frustrated, less philosophical now that consequences had arrived. "This isn't what you said would happen," she snapped once. He stopped putting her on speaker after that. Meanwhile, the social erosion accelerated. The country club rescinded his guest privileges. His parking access was invalid. The private dining room where he'd once been greeted by name suddenly had no availability. At a restaurant where he'd been a regular, his reservation mysteriously vanished. Later that evening, my assistant secured a table there under my name within minutes. Samuel noticed. He didn't comment, but his silence was louder than any accusation. Charity boards followed suit. Positions he'd been introduced to as Mrs. Davidson's husband quietly disappeared. Invitations stopped arriving. The most jarring moment came when he tried to schedule a routine appointment at our family's private medical clinic. I was in the kitchen when I heard his voice rise. "I've been a patient there for years." Pause. "No, I don't have another insurance provider." Another pause. His face drained of color. He hung up slowly. "They said I need to register as a new patient," he whispered, "and provide my own coverage." I said nothing. He looked at me like I'd just taken something essential from him. "I didn't mean to give up that," he said. "I didn't mean to give up the infrastructure." I exhaled slowly. "The infrastructure is the marriage," I said. "You don't get to keep the benefits after rejecting the foundation." That was the night something inside him cracked. He started blaming everyone. My family, my lawyers, the system, even Jade. She said it was about symbolism, he argued, about reclaiming my identity. I didn't remind him that Jade had been cheering in the dining room. He learned that lesson on his own. Social media didn't help. Jade had turned their relationship into content. Posts about courage, about choosing love over legacy, about rejecting toxic family dynamics. Every caption, every video. Proof. Not of manipulation, but of enthusiasm. Harold watched quietly, archiving everything. Samuel stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, started talking about reversing the decision. I can reclaim the name, he said one morning. I can sign something. We can fix this. I looked at him across the breakfast table. This isn't about paperwork, I said gently. It's about meaning. What does that even mean? He snapped. It means you said the name wasn't worth keeping. The marriage wasn't worth preserving, and you said it loudly enough for the world to hear. His family tried one final approach. A meeting, neutral ground, calm conversation. They asked me to consider reconciliation, to be gracious, to remember love. I listened respectfully. Then I asked one question. If he had stood up and said he didn't want my name because he loved someone else, would you be asking me to forgive him? No one answered. Because escalation isn't just about louder arguments. It's about clarity. And by then, everything was painfully clear. Samuel wasn't losing his identity. He was losing access. And that realization was changing him in ways no amount of philosophical language could soften. The man who once spoke about authenticity now worried about insurance premiums and rent. And somewhere inside that shift, something in me changed too. I stopped feeling responsible for his fall and started feeling free. The lowest point doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly on an ordinary evening when you realize you are completely alone inside a relationship that no longer exists. Samuel stopped fighting after that last family meeting. Not because he understood, but because he was exhausted. He moved through the house like a guest overstaying his welcome, slept on the edge of the bed, spoke only when necessary. The anger burned out, replaced by something heavier, fear. Fear of bills, fear of irrelevance, fear of being ordinary. And for the first time since the dinner, I felt something close to grief. Not for what he was losing, but for what we never truly were. One night, I came home late from the office and found him sitting in the dark living room. No lights, no television, just the glow of his phone illuminating his face. I can't do this, he said without looking up. I set my bag down slowly. Do what? Start over, he replied. Live like this. Counting expenses, applying for insurance, explaining myself to people who used to call me back in minutes. There was no accusation in his voice this time, just defeat. I sat across from him. This is what most people do, I said quietly. He laughed once, bitter, short. I'm not most people. That was the truth he was finally confronting. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing. Shallow, uneven. The sound of someone realizing too late that confidence built on access collapses without it. And for the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of it all. The betrayal, the humiliation, the months of doubt I'd swallowed to keep peace. I cried silently into my pillow, not because I wanted him back, but because letting go meant accepting that the future I'd imagined was never real. The next morning, he was gone. Not permanently, just absent. A note on the counter. I need space. He didn't say where he was going. Later, I learned he'd moved into a short-term rental, a furnished studio across town. No doorman, no concierge, no recognition. Jade visited him there. Once. That was enough. Reality stripped the romance quickly. No dinners comped, no invitations, no social gravity, just two people sitting in a small space trying to justify choices that no longer felt poetic. Their arguments spilled into messages he didn't realize I could still see on our shared tablet. Money, stress, blame, and underneath it all, resentment. A week later, Samuel came back to the house unannounced. I found him standing in the foyer, looking smaller than I remembered. I can't sleep, he said. I can't think. I waited. I ruined everything, he whispered. I didn't know it would feel like this. I looked at him then, really looked. This wasn't the man who'd stood at the table with a wine glass and an audience. This was someone confronting the consequences of being believed. I don't know who I am without the name, he said. And there it was. The darkest truth. Not that he'd lost me, but that he'd never known himself without what I represented. I felt the last thread snap, not in anger, but in clarity. I can't be your identity, I said softly, and I can't save you from discovering who you are. He sank onto the bench by the door, face in his hands. For a moment, I thought he might break completely. And maybe he did. But sometimes breaking is the only way the truth gets through. That night, after he left again, I stood alone in the house and realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. I wasn't waiting for him anymore, and that was the darkest and quietest turning point of all. The shift didn't come from revenge. It came from recognition. A week after Samuel showed up in the foyer, looking like a man who'd misplaced his spine, I received a call from Harold Whitman. Not urgent, not alarmed. Just precise. "Michaela," he said, "there's something you should be aware of." I closed my office door and sat. Harold explained that Jade had been making inquiries, quiet ones, calls to people she thought might still open doors. She was asking whether Samuel's situation was temporary, whether there was a way to restore standing. Not love, not reconciliation, standing. "She seems to believe," Harold continued, "that this is still a negotiation." I almost laughed. What Harold showed me next wasn't new evidence, but it was clarifying. Archived posts, videos, messages Jade had published in the weeks after the dinner. Celebratory, proud, enthusiastic. Every caption praised Samuel's courage, his decision, his rejection of the Davidson name. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no manipulation, just affirmation. Harold closed the folder. "If there's ever a question of intent," he said calmly, "this resolves it." I thanked him and hung up. And for the first time since November, I felt something settle into place. Not anger, not sadness. Peace. That same afternoon, my grandmother asked me to tea. She didn't lecture. She never did. She poured the tea carefully, hands steady despite her age, and said only one thing. "You believed him." I looked up. "When he told the world who he was," she continued, "you didn't argue. You listened." That was it. That was the moment I understood that strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to stop negotiating with reality. Samuel called that night. Not frantic this time. Controlled. Practiced. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about meaning." I waited. "I know I hurt you," he continued, "but I still believe in us. We could rebuild. Slowly. Slowly. Without the name, without the pressure." There it was. The offer. A smaller life, but still anchored to me. And suddenly I saw it clearly. He didn't want me. He wanted proximity to stability. "I'm not your rehabilitation program," I said gently. Silence. "I loved you," I continued, "but I won't shrink my life to make you feel less lost." He asked if I was choosing legacy over love. I answered honestly. "I'm choosing truth over denial." After we hung up, I stood by the window and watched the city lights come on, each one independent, standing on its own power. That night I made my decision. Not legally, not dramatically. Internally. I stopped waiting for him to come back. And the next morning, I told my family the same thing. I'm done. There were no celebrations, no relief, just quiet respect. The Davidson system didn't move against Samuel after that. It simply stopped considering him. And that distinction mattered. Because the turning point wasn't about punishment. It was about acceptance. He had chosen his path. And for the first time, I chose mine without carrying his confusion with me. Consequences don't need witnesses to be effective. But when they unfold in public, they have a way of clarifying reality for everyone involved. 2 months after the dinner, the Ashford Charity Gala arrived, our family's largest annual event. Crystal chandeliers, white glove service, the kind of evening where reputations are reinforced simply by being seen in the right conversations. I arrived alone. Not as a statement, just as fact. Samuel arrived later, with Jade. Fashionably late, carefully styled, confident in the way people are when they believe proximity still counts as belonging. Jade wore a gown that followed every rule but somehow missed the point. Samuel's suit fit perfectly, yet something about him felt untethered, like a man wearing a uniform without a unit. I watched from across the ballroom as they worked the room. Conversations ended quickly. Smiles were polite but shallow. People excused themselves with impeccable manners and invisible urgency. No confrontation, no rejection, just absence. That's how real fallout works in our world. After 20 minutes, James Morrison, our family's formal legal representative, approached them. He moved with purpose, expression neutral, carrying a cream-colored envelope embossed with the Davidson crest. Jade smiled when she saw it. Samuel didn't. James handed it to him without ceremony. "This is for you," he said quietly. The ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to lower as Samuel opened the envelope. The document was comprehensive, final. Revocation of property access, termination of foundation affiliations, formal severance of all residual privileges, confirmation of ineligibility for future reinstatement. Not punishment, closure. Samuel's face drained of color. Jade leaned closer, reading over his shoulder, her expression shifting rapidly. Confusion, calculation, alarm. Whispers spread, subtle, controlled. People didn't stare. They noted. Some of Samuel's former friends stepped back, literally. Others suddenly remembered someone across the room they needed to greet. Jade put her arm around him, saying something meant to sound supportive but laced with panic. For the first time, I saw her realize that being someone's chosen person meant very little when the world stopped choosing you back. They left early. The gala continued uninterrupted. That detail mattered to me. Over the following weeks, the reports filtered in, not through gossip, but through quiet confirmations. Samuel's consulting opportunities vanished. Introductions stalled. Meetings never materialized. Jade's network began distancing itself. Family drama is bad for business optics, especially when it ends this cleanly. She tried hosting her own events. Dinners, networking mixers, carefully curated guest lists. They felt forced, empty. You can't fabricate history. The final unraveling came quietly. Jade left first. No dramatic breakup, just practicality. The novelty had worn off. The bills hadn't. Samuel moved again, this time into a smaller place. Retail work followed, then paperwork, insurance applications, credit checks. Ordinary problems. I heard all of this secondhand. I didn't ask. The only direct encounter came weeks later when I ran into him by chance at the Botanical Reserve, where I volunteer every Thursday afternoon. He called my name softly. I didn't turn immediately. When I did, he looked like someone who'd aged several years in a season. I didn't think it would end like this, he said. I nodded. Most people don't. He asked if I was happy. I answered honestly. I'm at peace. That seemed to hurt more than anger ever could. I walked away without cruelty, without satisfaction, just finality. The Davidson Family Board met the following month and approved the Davidson Heritage Endowment, a $10 million scholarship and mentorship initiative focused on stewardship, accountability, and earned belonging. Samuel's name appears in our records now with a single notation. Voluntary renunciation. No commentary, no judgment. Just fact. And that, in the end, was the true fallout. Not revenge. Not humiliation. But reality, uninterrupted, unapologetic, and complete. 6 months have passed. Not enough time to forget, but enough time to understand. My life didn't implode when Samuel walked away from my name. It clarified. The noise fell away. The constant negotiation. The subtle apologies for a life I never chose but was born into. Gone. I still work. I still carry responsibility. But now I do it without trying to make myself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. People sometimes ask if I regret not fighting harder for my marriage. The truth is, I did fight. I fought by listening. I fought by believing him when he told the world who he was. And I fought by refusing to rescue someone from the consequences of a choice they made, proudly, publicly, and without hesitation. Samuel wanted freedom from the Davidson name. He got it. What he didn't understand was that freedom without preparation feels a lot like abandonment, especially when you've mistaken access for identity. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I learned. I learned that love without respect becomes erosion, that authenticity without accountability is just performance, and that some systems aren't cages, they're commitments. Today, when I walk through our family grounds, I feel lighter, not because the past didn't hurt, but because it no longer owns me. The name endures, the legacy continues. But more importantly, I do. If there's one lesson I'd leave you with, it's this. When someone tells you they don't want what you are, believe them. Let them go. And don't confuse strength with silence or kindness with self-erasure. Some choices don't need revenge. They just need time and the courage to step back and let the truth finish the work.